Walt Disney animation and horror feel almost like polar opposites. On one side is family-friendly entertainment. On the other is a genre loved by dang-ass freaks. But look a little closer and you'll see how horror has informed a lot of Disney history over the years. However, when it comes to Mickey Mouse, it seems as if horror has always stayed far away from the company's icon. Earlier this year, I did a deep dive into Paul Rudish's decade-long, 100-short-long run on Mickey Mouse through the series of Mickey Mouse and the Wonderful World of Mickey Mouse. And in that video and in my rewatch of the series, I was really struck by how much leeway that Rudish was given with Disney's flagship character. But it's far from the first time that someone's been allowed to go nuts with Mickey. It's just that there's one short in particular that Disney has essentially erased from their history for potentially being too scary with their head mouseketeer. And that's the 1995 animated short Runaway Brain, a quick tale of terror that sees Mickey Mouse's mind swapped with an enormous monster who's then let loose on Minnie. It's a short that's absolutely dripping with love for horror and a boundary-pushing nature that's led Disney to essentially erase it from their history. But why? It's time to dive into Runaway Brain, the Mickey Mouse horror story Disney doesn't want you to see. Animation and horror have a long, often stop-and-start history with each other, and I think that's often because of the bad reputation that animation has gotten as being a medium only for children. Obviously, that's not correct, but because of that, I think that a lot of animation studios were very hesitant to go into full-fledged horror for a lot of the 20th century. Instead, they would just dip their toes into horror just when they really needed something to break up what they were doing. Still, when they did so, it was usually pretty effective. Looney Tunes loved to parody horror for decades, with Bugs Bunny usually making fools out of classically creepy monsters. Something like the Telltale Heart from UPA in 1953 is really creepy. Don Bluth's movies, especially something like Secret of NIMH or All Dogs Go to Heaven, could get pretty horrifying. And that's nothing to say for anime, which is filled with some brutal and truly scary animated horror series. But when it comes to Walt Disney Animation, the relationship between horror and animation is a lot more complicated. From the start, Walt Disney always presented his creations as family-friendly and more focused on imagination and wonder than horror and thrills. But go all the way back to 1929 and you'll see that the first ever Silly Symphony short, Walt's series that ran for a decade and had 75 entries, was the spooky skeleton dance. And while it may not be all that scary, its animation showcase of a group of skeletons rising from the grave on a spooky night has been a Halloween staple for nearly a century. And for the next 10 years, Silly Symphonies would feature light horror off and on, with Hell's Bells following Damned Souls in Hell, and The Old Mill all about wordless, spooky atmosphere on a stormy night. On a bigger scale, the first ever animated feature film from Disney, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, threads horror throughout its story, with the evil queen being one of Disney's great villains. Afterward, sequences like Night on Bald Mountain in Fantasia and the Sleepy Hollow segment of The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad would keep the spookiness in Disney, but these were few and far between, even though all of these are awesome. Still, these are only moments of horror to add a thrill to a family-friendly story. The closest that Disney ever got to making a full-fledged animated horror story is probably The Black Cauldron in 1985, but that film's nearly disastrous production and failure at the box office was more than enough reason to keep the company away from truly scary stories. Meanwhile, the slow decline of Disney's financial performance and the era of the Disney Dark Age during the 70s and most of the 80s largely brought a lot of their animation division to a halt in favor of low-budget and more profitable live-action films. That is until the hiring of Michael Eisner as CEO and Jeffrey Katzenberg as essentially his number two, which led to the creation of the Disney Renaissance during the 90s. Once again, these movies would have scary moments, but are far from horror stories. It's an era of prestige that feels so far distant from the early years of Disney that they share very little DNA after decades of evolution. And so that brings us to Mickey Mouse during the 1980s, and honestly, it's a pretty good decade for the character when compared to what came before. See, Mickey had been gone for 30 years without a single short between 1953 and 1983, until the higher-ups realized the company's symbol was a bygone relic, leading to the character returning in Mickey's Christmas Carol. It's a classic, well-loved story that bridges the gap between the era of Walt Disney and the modern-day approach, with essentially nothing changing in the style besides the voices. Still, it's great, and it's really mostly a Scrooge McDuck short, which makes it even better. And the approach worked. Mickey's Christmas Carol was nominated for the Oscar for Best Animated Short, and showed Disney that the character still had potential in the modern day, besides being an emblem for their business. This would lead to a few new Mickey productions to coincide with the character's 60th anniversary. The Disney Channel show, Good Morning Mickey, which just re-aired old shorts with new Mickey branding, Mickey's Mouse Tracks, which is also just another re-airing of old shorts, and an adaptation of The Prince and the Pauper in 1990, a frequent rotation on VHS during my childhood. However, while Prince and the Pauper was designed to be the big comeback for the mouse, it ran in front of The Rescuers Down Under, which, as you might know if you're familiar with Disney history, was a big box office failure and took the short down with it. In the aftermath, Disney started juggling a lot of different priorities between their resurgent animation division, multiple theme park expansions, and a new, much higher budget approach to live action. As a result, Mickey Mouse was once again a side project and low priority for the company. This led to any future Mickey shorts placed under creative executive Kathleen Gavin, with the hodgepodge of weird side projects referred to as the Lunatic Fringe. Get out of here, 2016 Dean Ambrose, I don't mean you. But despite so few Mickey cartoons being made, Disney was still trying to get a new one finished, and eventually, this led to an idea from animator Chris Bailey, who had worked on The Great Mouse Detective, Oliver and Company, The Little Mermaid, The Lion King, and more as a character animator. If you were a director or part of the development, if you were between assignments, you were asked to develop Mickey shorts, said Bailey. They just never made one. They were always developing them. Eventually, it just became my turn to develop Mickey shorts. Bailey's idea, titled Tourist Trap, get out of here 1979 David Schmoller directed slasher film, I don't mean you, saw Mickey and Donald on vacation, only to have Donald lose his mind and try to kill his friend. And yeah, an insane idea already, but the timing was perfect as Disney's consumer products division really wanted something wacky and out there to boost sales of Mickey merchandise. This was the 90s after all, and Looney Tunes merch was everywhere. The only problem? Bailey's storyboard screening for the short went terribly, with Katzenberg telling him to go back and fix it. But Bailey felt that to make it more like the typical Mickey cartoon would make it pointless, saying, the cartoon had to be mean. If executives' problem was Donald trying to kill Mickey, because you couldn't do that, the soft version would be nothing. Instead, Bailey went to Roy Disney, nephew of Walt, former chairman, and still a powerful member of the board of directors, who gave him his blessing to move forward with a brand new idea for Mickey. In place of Tourist Trap, we have Runaway Brain, a much spookier, more horror-influenced piece of animation, which once again benefited from perfect timing, as Hocus Pocus in 1993 showed Disney that spookier stories could be in demand, and so work began on this doomed piece of animation. Okay, so let's talk about what this supposedly insane, horrifying, company-threatening cartoon is actually about. Runaway Brain opens with Mickey forgetting about his dating anniversary with Minnie due to his obsession with a very Mortal Kombat-like Snow White game, and, in his rush to come up with a date idea, accidentally causes Minnie to believe he's taking her to Hawaii. Strapped for cash, as classic Mickey usually is, he and Pluto find an ad for a fast job that just so happens to pay the same $999.99 as the trip. But when he arrives at the ominous home of Dr. Frankenoli, voiced by Kelsey Grammer and named as an homage to founding animators Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, Mickey is forced into a brain swap with Frankenoli's monster, Julius, an enormous, scary version of Pete. Now stuck in the gigantic body, Mickey's old bones are controlled by a raving monster, who soon finds out about Minnie and escapes to make her his own. Cue mayhem on the streets and a massive chase to save Minnie, get his body back, and somehow get their Hawaii date. And surprise, surprise, I love it. In short, Runaway Brain has that really high quality, zippier tone of a mainstream Disney production. And the result is something that at times you can't believe got made, but most of the time just kind of feels like a slightly darker tinged classic Mickey cartoon. And for all you dang-ass freaks out there that somehow have the same intersection of interest that I have that has led to me creating this video, you'll be absolutely thrilled with all the different horror references and touchstones that you can find within these lightning-fast 8 minutes. Immediately, Bailey's short lets you know it's about to break the rules by having a classic Mickey intro ripped to pieces by Monster Mickey's claws, cutting to a dark and stormy night. And after a few lighter minutes of setup, Mickey's visit to our Mad Doctor perfectly references Father Merrin's arrival in The Exorcist. Cue massive trapdoors, a huge underground lab, a villain who's half Frankenstein, half murders in the Rue Morgue, and of course, our massive monster is himself a hybrid of Frankenstein's monster and King Kong, with the climax of the short being a chase through a very New York City, ending in the monster knocked off and yo-yoing from a skyscraper. As for our monster Mickey, I feel like Bailey was channeling a lot of Rat Fink in the design and movement, especially in the moment when our monster chases after the heroes on top of a car. And that alone is a really wild subversion of Mickey's history. Rat Fink was created by Ed Big Daddy Roth in 1963 and was made to be the opposite of Disney's mouse. He's all pointy teeth, buggy bloodshot eyes, and lurid obsession, usually over cars. So to suddenly make Mickey exactly like him is to throw out everything the character stood for. And, well, I think it's awesome. There's also just a ton of dark, subversive humor here, with Mickey's Just Say No poster framing cheese as drugs in a dare fashion. The ending, with Mickey and Minnie using Julius to pull them to Hawaii, has a dark tinge to its happy conclusion. And there's just something messed up about this brain scan showing that Mickey's brain goes into his ears too. The character of Dr. Frankenoli in particular is just really dark and disturbing. It's not just his very creepy lines.
Ooh, I like it when they squeal.
But his relish in mad experiments. He's no tortured Frankenstein, he's just evil, and his grim fate, fried to a crisp in the experiment and collapsing into a pile of bones, is messed up. Forget the deaths of Clayton, Ursula, or Gaston. This is the darkest Disney villain death, and it's in a frickin' Mickey cartoon. Looking at it now, it doesn't seem nearly as boundary crossing as it probably did 30 years ago, but given that in mind, you gotta wonder, how did Disney actually let this cartoon get made?
Talk about your ironclad contract.
With Disney and specifically Jeffrey Katzenberg giving Bailey's project a green light, a team of animators with a lot of talent, a lot of experience, and no current assignment were brought together to form this team. That includes layout supervisor Jim Behold, art director Ian Gooding, and character animator Andreas Deha. The team was then put to work at the newly launched Walt Disney Animation France studio, a rebranding of the recently acquired Brizzi Studios. At the time, the French studio had a gap in their production schedule and Runaway Brain would fill it. And even though Disney CEO Michael Eisner had signed off on the project, Disney animation executives Thomas Schumacher and Peter Schneider were strongly against it. Really, it was only studio chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg who protected Bailey's vision, approving his ideas and making sure the team and studio were in place for production. Still, it's not like Mickey had never been in a spooky short before. The Haunted House, The Mad Doctor, and Lonesome Ghosts all put the mouse in spooky situations. But then again, Mickey was always unharmed. You can't say the same for Runaway Brain. According to Bailey, the designs in Runaway Brain were meant to specifically go against Disney conventions, saying, all that early Disney stuff, the cute characters, they were designed like stuffed animals. Their wrists are always bigger than their arms. Their ankles were bigger than their thighs, so they hang like stuffed animals. That's the base of their appeal. Jeffrey wanted it to be really aggressive and didn't want anybody to mistake it for anything that had been dug out of the vault, and Tom and Peter were more protective of the classic Mickey and more conservative. However, this is where Bailey and Runaway's good luck with timing ran out, as on August 25th, 1994, in the midst of production, Jeffrey Katzenberg left Disney. Oh man, this video has horror, Mickey history, the Disney Renaissance, and the roots of Dreamworks. Can you hear me absolutely salivating while researching this video? With Katzenberg out, Disney animation executives Thomas Schumacher and Peter Schneider were now fully in charge of Runaway Brain, and because of that, a lot of Bailey's darker ideas and a lot of already finished production was given the boot. Initially, the video game that Mickey was going to be playing was a first-person shooter Bambi game. Okay, that's really dark. In response, Peter Schneider said, "Not a chance in hell." In the film's ending, Mickey would be holding an effigy of Minnie in order to get Julius to pull them to Hawaii. This was turned into the wallet photo that you see now. Finalized animation had Monster Mickey constantly drooling over Minnie. All saliva was cut out. During the brain swap, Mickey's electrocution, which Mickey's electrocution is already an extremely dark phrase on its own, would have him have his head and brain boiled like a pot of hot dogs. This was instead turned into a more standard electrocution of the character. Just regular old electricity flowing through his body, not his brain getting boiled. Eventually, Schneider and Schumacher brought in their own editor to cut the short according to their own vision, but the resulting cut was so choppy that brand new animation, a lot of it done by Bailey himself, needed to be added in at the last minute to make it all flow a lot more smoothly. By the end of production, Bailey was in a constant war with Disney executives, fighting them over every cut and never winning, powerless over the story he'd brought to life. The end result is the short you can now see as Runaway Brain. Still a dark and often subversive story, but one bearing the hallmarks of Disney yanking the steering wheel in a different direction late into production. Still, there was only so much the executives could do to change Bailey's vision after the short was completed. Once finished, Disney had to decide what to do with the short that they'd sunk so much time and money into, and well, what they decided to do was not much. Throughout 1995, Runaway Brain was attached to A Kid in King Arthur's Court in the US, which Gavin said was proof that the company didn't care about the short. Sorry, Thomas Ian Nicholas, nothing personal. Hunchback of Notre Dame in Australia, and A Goofy Movie in the UK. There were also plans for it to be released in front of the live-action 101 Dalmatians in 1996, with the short even being sent to theaters with the film, only for Disney to change their mind and pull the cartoon so late that some theaters still showed it. But after all of that, Runaway Brain was actually nominated for an Oscar for Best Animated Short in 1996. And while it lost out to Wallace and Gromit's A Close Shave, that's still something that only a few Mickey shorts have ever done. Still, Disney was absolutely done with Bailey's short, and I gotta ask, why does Disney hate this cartoon so much? Honestly, the company hasn't tried to bury one of their productions this badly since Song of the South was released 80 years ago, and well, probably live-action Moana in about 6 months from now, but only one of those had people picketing it over racism nearly a century ago. The worst thing Runaway Brain did was make that mouse a little too scary and make the action a little too much like a Looney Tune. Really, all I can honestly think of is that Bailey's short came out at exactly the wrong time, with Disney right in the middle of the Renaissance and at its full power as a family-friendly conglomerate with Mickey as its ceremonial figurehead. Making the company's central character a ravenous, woman-hungry monster hasn't been this bad for business since Harvey Weinstein ran Miramax. Thank you. Even the consumer product division, who helped push Runaway Brain forward as a distinct and weird story that they could sell fresh merch off of, thought that it was essentially unsellable and made almost no products based on it. The result? Runaway Brain would be the last theatrical Mickey short for another 18 years, with the next not coming until 2013's Get a Horse, which is great but is much more of a technological showcase that's trying to be like Walt's classic Mickey than anything new and different. Instead, Disney leaned toward new TV shows starring the mouse, including Mickey Mouse Works, House of Mouse, and Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. As I discussed in my Rudish Mickey Mouse video, what sets the Rudish cartoons apart is that they're a hard shift away from the very sanitized Mickey that had been solidified in the 2 decades that came before. And really, Mickey the modern corporate mascot all started when Runaway Brain scared the company away from doing anything this crazy and dark again. As for Chris Bailey, he would work on a lot of different animated projects afterward. Some for Disney, like the It's Tough to Be a Bug ride, Kim Possible, and Hercules, as well as projects at other studios like Garfield the Movie and Alvin and the Chipmunks. But never anything that involved Mickey ever again. Because the cartoon wasn't really perceived that great, I felt like I didn't want to animate anymore, and the opportunities there were slim. I thought it was time to leave, said Bailey. And as for Runaway Brain itself, well, it's essentially been swept under the rug entirely by Disney. It's not available on Disney+, despite most Mickey shorts being available on that platform. Actually, the last official release of this cartoon in any form was on a DVD collection of Mickey shorts that was released back in 2004. There was also a Movies Anywhere digital download version of the Walt Disney Animation Studios shorts collection, but Runaway Brain isn't actually on that physical collection. It is a digital download exclusive. And there was also a Super 8 film version of this that was released by a third party years ago too. So yeah, despite the guard changing many times over in the decades since Disney first released Runaway Brain, it's very clear that this is not going to be available by Disney anytime soon, unless you search for it online. That, of course, has made the short into an object of fascination for fans, building it up into a mythic piece of lost media and a rule-breaking outlaw in the Disney canon. Does it deserve its reputation as being a dark, sinister, banned piece of art? Not really. It's still an approved Disney cartoon. However, it still feels very grotesque and disturbing at times, especially when seen in the larger context of Mickey's stories. And the longer that Runaway Brain has existed as the cartoon Disney doesn't want you to see, the more people that want to see it. Still, I think it's pretty great. The dark humor is balanced very well, the animation is basically on par with a theatrical Disney film of the time, the pacing is pretty wild, and with Wayne Allwine and Russi Taylor as Mickey and Minnie, you get that fantastic modern voice work that everyone associates with these characters, just now happening in the context of a creepy story that turns into a wild adventure. Disney clearly sees that the cartoon has its devoted fans, allowing for Julius to be a secret boss in Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, and sneaking in a reference inside the queue for Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. But really, that's only helped to make fans even more curious about this strange and freaky little piece of Disney media, which just might be destined to live forever on the unofficial sides of the internet. According to Behold, Runaway Brain is used internally at Disney Animation as an example of what not to do. And in an article from Polygon spotlighting the cartoon, a source told writer Drew Taylor that Disney intentionally tries to keep the short hidden and out of sight. Runaway Brain has only gained a greater and greater reputation of being dark, dangerous, and taboo. Honestly, I'd be shocked if Disney ever distributed Runaway Brain through any official means anytime soon. But for any fan of Disney, animation, and horror, that's all the more reason to seek it out. Thanks for watching today's video, and Summerween is almost at an end. But I realized that with the remaining time, I wanted to do something that was just a little bit different from anything I'd done within the last 2 months, but that combined a lot of my favorite topics for videos on this channel. So Mickey, Disney history, and horror all combined into talking about Runaway Brain. And Runaway Brain really is kind of a demented short, but it's super fun and it's incredibly well done. And honestly, I think its reputation of being this dark and edgy and terrifying Disney short that Disney banned because it was just too edgy for them is way overblown. I can see why Disney was probably unhappy with it, but to basically bury it is really crazy to me after really picking apart this cartoon. I get that it basically breaks all of the conventions of what they want to do with Mickey, but seeing it today on the other side of Rudish's Mickey shorts and a lot of other Mickey cartoons that have come out in the last decade, Runaway Brain really doesn't seem all that strange and out of place. It does for its time maybe, but really not anymore. And yet Disney still wants to keep this thing completely buried. It's crazy to me. Put it out, give it a little boost, put out a lot of merchandise with it, and now you're gonna get so many Disney fans that also love horror going absolutely bananas for Runaway Brain. Just do it, Disney. You're gonna make a bunch of money. I know how much you love money. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Runaway Brain if you have seen it or if this has inspired you to go seek it out, some of your favorite spooky and creepy Disney shorts and movies, as well as other horror animation that you'd like for me to cover on this channel. As always, a huge thank you to my members and patrons for their continued support, and if you'd like to be a member or patron, it's only $2 a month for early access to every video and exclusive reviews. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and having a great Summerween.